A loss of a loved one can be considered a catastrophic event.
Oh, yeah.
And so insurance is a big part of that.
Yep.
Somebody having to go into a nursing home, that's a pretty catastrophic event. Sometimes that's even more emotional than a person passing away.
It can be.
And when you're doing your financial planning, you're basically saying, let's assume that these things happen. We stress test the plan to say what happens financially if this happens. Okay, you're self-insured, or you know what, your survivors might be in a little bit of trouble here, so we need to consider finding some insurance to cover these specific needs. And that's just all part of good risk management.
It is. Yeah, it's building a plan and then running all those worst case scenarios to understand, what is going to happen to them financially, and to have that understanding up front. And then we can start to analyze and figure out, okay, do we need to cover these risks, and how do we go about doing it? What's the most cost-effective way?
Starting your route to retirement.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dean Barber, founder and CEO of Barber Financial Group. Welcome to the Guided Retirement Show. We're going to have a subject today with certified financial planner Will Doty. We're going to talk about being prepared for disastrous events or unforeseen events, things that can happen. Nobody likes to talk about this, but it's critical. And as a certified financial planner professional, that is the role, to make sure that everything that could possibly happen has been taken into consideration, and you've got a game plan in place. Please enjoy my conversation with Will Doty, certified financial planner professional. All right, Will Doty, certified financial planner professional. It's so great to have you to discuss this particular topic. It's nothing that anybody really wants to talk about, but we're going to talk about preparedness for, for any type of a catastrophic event, whether it's the loss of a loved one, whether it's a weather-related type of an event. Anything can happen at any given point in time. I want you to start off, Will, by talking about, as a certified financial planner professional, why is this critical from a financial perspective?
Well, Dean, a lot of mistakes can happen when a disaster occurs. And, the last thing you want to have happen is to financially be distraught when you're trying to get through something like your house burning down or the loss of a loved one. You want to make sure that you're prepared.
When you're doing a financial plan for somebody, what steps do you take initially to make sure that people can have access to the right documents, that they know, their loved ones know who to contact? What's the plan? What are the steps involved there? I know there are multiple steps, and for each person it's going to be slightly different, but how do you address that? And I guess another counterpart to that is, how do people feel about you talking about that as part of their plan? Because I think a lot of people think, well, my plan, here's my certified financial planner, you're all about my investments, Will. What are you talking to me about this other stuff for?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Dean. Ultimately, it all starts with the plan, right? We have to be prepared for whatever the case may be. So same thing when we're building a retirement plan. We want to think through all the pitfalls that could happen with somebody's retirement. Same thing with catastrophic events. We want to make sure that people are prepared and they understand what they need to be doing in the event that one does happen.
So let's go through and just kind of play out some scenarios here. Husband and wife, retired, on a cruise, another part of the world. One of them has a heart attack and passes away. Or maybe even worse, one of them has a stroke and is incapacitated and is in a foreign country and needs to have care. What does that surviving spouse or the spouse that didn't have the stroke, what types of documents do they need to have at their disposal in a foreign country in an event like that?
Yeah, obviously power of attorney is a huge piece of it for financial and healthcare decisions. Making sure that you have access to those documents no matter where you're at in the world. So it's always good practice to, obviously you want hard copies of those things, but to have a digital copy that you can get to in the ready. Clients here, we have document vaults that we're able to upload these documents to, and that you can go on the internet anywhere in the world and boom, download it, you're ready to go. So making sure that you're prepared in that manner is very, very helpful. I would think other documents would just be, emergency contacts. Who does the spouse need to be contacting here in the U.S. for insurance coverage and things of that nature. So having all that stuff in one place is a great idea. And actually, FEMA created an emergency financial aid first aid kit, is what they call it. You can download it from their website. It's very in-depth, literally covers every piece of financial information. And it's a great thing to go through and periodically update, maybe when you're doing your taxes. Obviously, a lot of that information you're kind of compiling around that time. And just making sure that you have it all there and that everybody knows where it is, right?
Right. So this document on the FEMA website that's available to anybody without cost, you think it'd be a good idea to have somebody download that, fill it out, image it, put it in their document vault, have it with them at all times. So, and then say, okay, here's my emergency contact information. This needs to go to my child. This needs to go to whoever, so that they know, here's everything. Here's the rules. Here's the instructions. Here's what happens.
Correct. Yep. I would strongly urge that everybody get, fireproof, waterproof safe for their home, have hard copies there. But more importantly, again, make sure there's a digital copy and that everybody that needs to know about it is well informed in how to get it.
Yeah, where's it at? Not that you're necessarily going to share everything with everybody beforehand, but you want to make sure that it's all taken care of. I mean, you and I have both witnessed multiple times where those things weren't done. They weren't done properly, and it turns into a nightmare. And in fact, on a former episode of the Guided Retirement Show, I interviewed a guy who was an ER surgeon for 40 years. His name was Dr. Molk, Dr. Alan Molk. And he was just incensed at how many people just ignore the end-of-life planning issues. They have no financial powers of attorney. They have no healthcare directives, no healthcare powers of attorney. They just don't have anything. And so what winds up happening is you wind up with siblings fighting over what's going to happen with mom or dad. Yep. Or, remember the Tara Shivey case from years and years and years ago, where the parents wanted her to stay on life support. The husband's like, no, that's not what she wanted. Well, there was nothing in writing. Yep. Right. Yep. So it wound up into a huge court battle.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, it's human nature. I mean, we're all invincible, right?
For sure. Especially men.
Yeah. These things aren't going to happen to us. So it's easy to put that off. To put off things like your estate plan or planning for life insurance. But those are important things to have in place.
So when you talk about risk management, a catastrophic event, a loss of a loved one can be considered a catastrophic event.
Oh, yeah.
And so insurance is a big part of that.
Yep.
Do you need to have insurance? Somebody having to go into a nursing home, that's a pretty catastrophic event. Sometimes that's even more emotional than a person passing away.
It can be.
And so how's that going to affect the surviving family members from a financial perspective? And when you're doing your financial planning, you're basically saying, let's assume that these things happen. We stress test the plan to say what happens financially if this happens. Okay, you're self-insured, or you know what, your survivors might be in a little bit of trouble here, so we need to consider finding some insurance to cover these specific needs. And that's just all part of good risk management.
It is. Yeah. It's building a plan and then running all those worst case scenarios to understand, what is going to happen to them financially, and to have that understanding up front. And then we can start to analyze and figure out, okay, do we need to cover these risks, and how do we go about doing it? What's the most cost effective way?
And then I know the will and the trust, they play a very large part in this process. And so talk to us about where you think the will and the trust come in, and how critical is it that people have a will or a trust, and what happens if they don't? I mean, that's a lot of questions, but let's go for it.
Yeah, no, all great questions. So obviously, the will is important because that's your wishes on paper, right? What do you want to have happen when you pass away? Now, a will is a great thing to have. Everybody needs to have it. But more importantly, you got to make sure that your beneficiary designations are done correctly on all of your assets. I know that's something that gets missed far too often, unfortunately. And sometimes we see it where, you had your spouse on as a primary, but you had no contingents. So what happens in the event that the plane goes down and you're both in it, right? It's stuff like that people they don't really think through. And then more importantly, depending upon kind of your asset level and things that you're wanting to have happen when you pass away, a trust could be very, very vital. That way, your wishes continue to live on with your money, and it also puts protections in place for your family members so you can avoid the infighting and things of that nature.
I think a lot of people don't really understand, Will, that a will is actually part of a trust.
Correct.
So a complete trust is going to include a will,
Yep.
healthcare powers of attorney, financial powers of attorney, healthcare directives. So your trust is not just a simple document that is a standalone. It includes all those pieces.
Correct. It's an estate plan.
Right. And that flows into other issues where people may be naming their trust as the beneficiary to their IRA and maybe not understanding what are the implications of the trust inheriting the IRA versus a real person inheriting the IRA, and the difference in the tax ramifications and how that might affect the beneficiaries.
Yeah, no, that's a big deal, especially with the event of the Secure Act back in 2019. So if somebody does have special verbiage in their trust for IRAs, they may need to revisit that. It's not saying that a trust can't be the beneficiary of a tax-deferred account. It most certainly can, but things have to be done properly so that there's not a tax nightmare for the beneficiaries.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I see happening all too often with the vast majority of the population is that people will get a trust drawn up and they take that trust and they set it on the shelf, and it's a really pretty binder with a lot of words and a lot of pieces of paper. And inside that trust, most attorneys have listed, here are your funding instructions. These are your responsibilities now. And it is to retitle assets into the trust, to change beneficiaries the way that the titling instructions say to do. But so many times the individual thinks that I've got my binder, it's done.
Oh, yeah.
But if they don't go and then fully fund the trust, then they've wasted money with that attorney in preparing that trust. And then another factor, Will, is maybe they get the funding done, but then they don't revisit that trust for a decade or for 2 decades.
Yep.
And by the time something happens and the trust needs to be utilized, none of the intents that they want now were the same as what they wanted then, yet they didn't go back and revisit and amend and update that trust. So how often would you recommend, once a person gets a trust in place, should they be reviewing that trust?
I think every other year would be good housekeeping rules. Bare bones minimum every 3 to 5, right? Because not only does your personal situation potentially change and what your wishes are, but again, laws change. So we want to make sure that everything is staying intact and doing exactly what you want to do.
So are you on the attorney full employment committee then? You want them to visit with attorneys and pay money that often?
No, but a simple review, just reading through, again, making sure all the players are the correct players. I mean, say for an example, you list a family member to be a trustee after you pass away, and unfortunately that family member passes away, right? You need to make sure that those things are being kept up to date.
So trust is an important part of it. Wills are part of the trust, the directives, the powers of attorney, the document from FEMA, all of that great information, making sure that your risk management programs are in place and you've got the proper insurances for the right amounts. What about family meetings, Will? What about meetings that parents should be having with their children to inform them of their wishes? Do you think that that's important?
I do. I have a lot of those with my clients where they'll bring their children in and we just have a round-robin discussion. Again, it's up to the parents on what is shared, obviously. We don't need to share everything, but for the kids to understand who are all the players, who do they need to be contacting, it makes that transition, I know from experience, a lot easier for those kids.
Yeah, it certainly does. You know, probably I'm thinking back to, I want to go back, it's probably 15 years ago, Will, where I had done a review with a couple. Both were 70 years old.
Yeah.
And the gentleman came in and he goes, well, Dean, he goes, just know that you got to put up with me for another 20 years. I just had my physical and the doc says I'm in tip-top shape. And he said, living another 20 years probably not going to be a problem for me. 3 weeks later, the wife called me and he died of a massive stroke in the middle of the night. And as sad as it was and as unexpected as it was, her next meeting in my office shortly after the funeral, she sat in front of me and she said, you know, Dean, she said, this is probably best case scenario, she said, I know he's where he wants to be now. And she said, the greatest thing is, from a financial perspective, I don't have to worry about anything because we had everything in place, so I can spend my time now just grieving.
Yep.
Right? And so that to me was the power of making sure that that's done.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot of power there. And then that way, your spouse or whoever is left behind, again, like what you said, they can focus on the grieving process, not the financial process.
Yeah. And even though there's still work to be done, I think the greatest thing is if you're working with, like we do, a team of people where we're going to have people to settle the estate, we're going to have people to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed and all the processes are taking place, it doesn't leave that grieving family member out there to try to figure out what to do.
Oh, yeah, correct. Yeah, a perfect example, one of my clients, I want to say it was 5 years ago, maybe. Unfortunately, wife was struggling with brain cancer for quite some time. And eventually they thought it was getting better, took a turn for the worst, and we lost her. And he told me, probably 6 months after, I obviously had quite a few meetings with him in that interim, but he told me, the greatest thing, Will, was that I knew that when this happened, I didn't have to worry about anything financially.
Yeah.
I knew that we were prepared. I knew that you were going to be there to help walk me through everything. And there was no greater peace of mind than that.
Yeah, it is good. And the thing is, Will, so you said something earlier in the program that we're all invincible. None of these things are ever going to happen to us until they do.
Yep.
And it's always unexpected. And so I think part of the reason why people resist planning for catastrophic events is because it's uncomfortable to think about.
It is.
But because it's uncomfortable to think about, if you don't address it, then there's this gnawing sensation that something is left undone.
Correct.
And in almost all the cases, there's one spouse over another who has that gnawing sensation more than another that's like, we got to get this done. We got to get this done. Yep. Oh, yeah, we'll get to it. So it's critical. And I'm so happy that you bring that up in your financial planning process with your clients, because I think that that's critical. We've had people, Will, over the years that say, I don't really want to deal with that. And you can't force them.
No.
All you can do is explain the importance of it. And I think that as we're talking about losing a loved one, adult children should be speaking with their elderly parents. Their parents are in their 70s or their 80s. The adult children need to bring this subject up.
Correct.
What's the plan? What have you done? Share with me, not necessarily your financial stuff, but what's the process going to look like? Who's going to be in charge? And I think one thing, while we wrap up kind of the trust discussion here, naming a child as a successor trustee can be a double-edged sword. It can be smooth and easy because that child's there, but can also make for sibling rivalries, or it puts a lot of burden on that successor trustee.
Yeah. Well, not only the successor trustee, but the executor of the estate. It's all things that you really need to have conversations with your family members of, I'm picking these people for these reasons, making sure that all the kids are okay with those decisions, because you don't know. I mean, one of your kids may have wanted to be the executor for some reason, and the other kid that you name may not want that responsibility.
Right.
So having those discussions, I think, just makes it a lot smoother for everybody.
Yeah, agreed. And of course, you and I think about that as the financial planning piece of it, and being able to have confidence in where you're at and that things are taken care of in the event that we do lose a loved one or one goes into a long-term care facility or something like that. Let's switch gears a little bit, Will, to other types of catastrophic events that can occur. Obviously, it can be a stroke, it could be a car accident, it could be a home burning down, it could be a tornado, it could be a flood, any kind of a natural disaster like that. What are you coaching people to do to plan for the possibility that those types of events could take place. They're remote, right?
Yep.
We know death is certain.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one we have to plan for. But these other things are not necessarily certain, but they are there and they can occur. And if they do, how do you coach people to be prepared for those?
Yeah, no, great question. Obviously, with natural disasters, you need to do the research in your general region of the country. What type of natural disasters are there? Are there hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, whatever that may be? And then you need to have a plan, and you need to communicate this plan with your family. Myself, I've got 3 little ones at home, right? So I need to be having discussions with them of, okay, tornado sirens are going off. What are you doing? Where are you going? Where are we all supposed to meet up in the house? How do you communicate during these emergency times? And that's something I think a lot of people don't really think through, especially in a day and age now where everybody has a cell phone, there's no landline. What happens if, Dean, you have a heart attack and you're at home, and if you had little kids at home, how are they going to contact somebody for an emergency? So things like that, you just want to make sure that you're thinking through and making sure that everybody in the house knows what to do when these events unfold.
You've seen a lot of people people call them the survivalists, right? Where they're going to have, X number of days of water bottled. They're going to have X number of days of food that's in, it's canned goods or dried goods or things like that. They're going to have the emergency generator. They're going to have all the things that are there in order to survive a period of time without power, potentially without water. So some people think, that's extreme. The chances that you're ever going to have, you're going to have to get rid of that stuff in 10 years because it's not going to be any good anymore. And we have to do it again. But what's your thoughts on that? Should people be really thinking about that and at least having a few days supply in some sort of a location in their home, like a shelter or something like that, where in case that does happen, you've got the resources?
Yeah, I see nothing wrong with it, especially if you're in a part of the country where, you could be down for a week, like a hurricane, or up in the Northeast, those massive snowstorms where power may be out for a few days, right? There's nothing wrong with having some bottles of water and some canned goods and, little flashlights and stuff piled somewhere.
So what else, Will, as we talk about, preparing for a catastrophic event, what else are you coaching your clients on, and what other things should people be considering?
I think the main things are kind of like what we talked about, Dean, is making sure everybody understands what the plan is, who all the players are, where do you meet, how do you communicate, and again, getting to some type of document vault of some sort so that if something does happen, say for an example, tornado hits and unfortunately you get hurt, right? Does your wife know who to call and where to get that information? I think that's really some of the most important points.
Yeah, she always jokes with me, Will, because she pays all the bills and does all that. If something happens to her, I'm not going to know what to do. But I figured it out. I know where she keeps everything, so I hire somebody to do it. How about that?
Yep.
But the bottom line is, I think that again, it's not fun to address this issue of preparing for catastrophic events, but it's something that's critical, and there's all kinds of ways that you need to be doing it. And of course, I think the best way to do it is to start with the creation of an overall financial plan. And of course, an overall financial plan is going to include not just your investments, it's going to include your taxes, it's going to include your estate plan, and it's going to include all of your risk management. So those are the basic 4 pillars. So if a person can start there and not just say to the certified financial planner, I've got the estate plan taken care of, Will, or I've got plenty of insurance, Will, we don't need to talk about that, or I got somebody that prepares my taxes, we're not going to talk about that. What they need to do is just back up and say, okay, let's look at everything, regardless of whether you think it's done or whether it's not done. Most of the time, there are changes that need to be made. Very rarely do we complete a comprehensive financial plan and pat that person on the back and shake their hand and say, you know what, you don't need my help because you've got everything perfect. Very rarely does that happen. I can remember one time in my 35 years where I could actually say that was the case.
Yeah, and one area that I find kind of interesting when it comes to working with clients is property and casualty insurance.
Oh, yeah. That gets ignored a lot. I mean, people have it, but it's like, do they have the right amount and are they paying the right premium? Yeah.
Yep. And then a lot of times those, people don't want to bring that up because their property and casualty person, they've been with them for 20 years and they feel almost like it's a threat to that individual just to talk about what their coverage is. And really it's just about, again, making sure that things are done correctly. Not saying that your property casualty person isn't doing things right, but a perfect example right now, house values.
Right.
Shooting through the roof. Are you making sure your coverage is correct? That's important.
Well, it's all important. And that's why, we focus on the review process, where every other year we're looking at the trust and the estate plan. Every other year we're looking at the insurance, and every year we're looking at the taxes, because you and I both know the taxes are one of the largest wealth eroding factors facing people, and they can control those taxes as long as they create that longer term forward looking plan.
Correct.
Well, Will, I appreciate you taking time to sit down and share with our audience, what you need to do in order to prepare for catastrophic events. And of course, there is ways that you can get in touch with us, and I'll tell you what that is here shortly. Will, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Guided Retirement Show. As usual, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure give us a thumbs up, interact with us right here on YouTube, and share this with your friends. Also, remember that any of the resources that we mentioned today can be found through a link in the show notes. That's also a location where you can schedule a 20-minute Ask Anything session with one of our certified financial planners. Thanks for joining us.
Starting your route to retirement.